Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have enough Black teachers teaching. There's an ethnic cleansing of teaching staff, and Black teachers, no matter how much education you have, expertise, no matter how many dreams you have of helping children, there is an ethnic cleansing going on. And it's happening here in California. It's happening everywhere, but it is really, really happened here in California a lot. Ethnic cleansing of the nation's teaching staffs. A civil rights tragedy done in the name of civil rights. During the last 15 years, tens of thousands of Black teachers have been removed from their positions on the staff of the nation's public schools. This unacknowledged ethnic cleansing, which has decimated the nation's Black middle class, has taken place all over nation, from Chicago to New Orleans, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., California. I'm adding that in there, making matters worse. Is that the Black teachers removed were for the most part lifetime educators, while those replacing them have been white short-timers coming from programs like Teach for America. Anyone looking at this pattern with the luxury of distance would say this was a tragedy of profound proportions, destabilizing communities and leaving our most vulnerable young people without mentors in their school. Yet the architects of the policies which produced this were for the most part political liberal, using slogans like school reform is civil rights for the 21st century to justify school closings and mass firings of teachers in the nation of urban centers. How did this happen? At the root was a failure and was the primary reason for the rapid growth in racial and economic inequality in the United States in the last 40 years, and that bad teachers were the primary reason for failing schools. So this belief, promoted by billionaire philanthropists, spread through the foundation world like wildfire. And Booker, if you accepted this analysis and the fastest path to greater equality was to close failing schools with failure to define exclusivity and start over again with new schools, preferably charter schools staffed by young people from the nation's top universities. And guess who those people are going to be? They're not, most of them weren't Black. And so though this explanation for growing inequality in the US or anywhere else would never be endorsed by any credible economist, it spread with a fervor of religion throughout the highest levels of Democratic and Republican parties. All across the nation, school reform policies were put in place which mandated closings of schools where test scores were low and the funding of charter schools and alternative certification programs like Teach for America. Okay, so one entire city, New Orleans, where the entire public school system was replaced by charters and the thousands of teachers were fired, was held up as a model for the entire nation and used to justify school closings, characterization, and the teacher firings in almost every major city. Only now is the country beginning to wake up and see the casualties. And so not in terms of the tens of thousands of Black teachers that were fired, but in terms of communities destabilized and in many cases gentrified communities that are happening right now, and students left without mentors who understand them and believe in them. So it's time to put a stop to the madness, stop closing schools and stop opening charter schools, stop supporting alternative certification programs, and make cultural competence a higher priority than the test scores. So start identifying and recruiting teachers of color to work in the nation's public schools and begin rehiring some of the greatest teachers pushed out by the travesty known as school reform. And this is by Mark Mason with the Brooklyn accent, of course. And so this is true. And so a lot of the Black teachers are no longer in the school. So there's a lot of Black teachers that could have been teaching. They lost their jobs, or they're not appreciated, or they're underpaid, or they're demoted into being instructional aides or paraprofessionals, and they're never given credit where credit is due. And a lot of their know and expertise is pulled from them. And what you think is your lead teacher is not, in fact, your lead teacher. Your lead teacher is the teacher that is the aide teacher. But that lead teacher is pulling all of their know and incorporating it into their curriculum and taking the credit for it. And so moving along, we have the next issue, which is a pretty lengthy one, but it is true. Race, poverty, and interpreting overrepresented in special education. Representation. And so this is under Brookings. Race, Poverty, and Interpreting Overrepresentation in Special Education. So this is by Nora Gordon, and this was put out in 2017, September 20. So new research by Morgan and Farrakos, Hillmer, and Makzuga once again finds that when you take over the student's characteristics, notably family income and achievement, into account, racial, ethnic minority students are less likely to be identified for special education than white students. So though this finding is by now well established, it remains sufficiently controversial to generate substantial media buzz, and plenty of research with less convincing methods has been interpreted as showing that too many Blacks, especially boys, are identified for special education. Bingo. I've been trying to tell people this, and some people are not listening, and some people are listening. However, we want more people to listen. That a lot of our Black kids are being pushed into programs that they don't even need to be in, and the programs they should be in, they're not getting the help that they should be getting. And so I've been trying to get this out for a while now. Yet you have all of these other people that are trying to block the messages, and they're talking about all these other things that are relatively unimportant. So, and plenty of research with the less convincing methods has been interpreted as showing that too many Blacks, especially boys, are identified for special education. So the old conventional wisdom may be intuitively appealing because aggregate disabilities rate with no adjustment for family income or the other students' characteristics are higher for students who are Black, 1.4 times, or Native American, 1.7, and lower for whites, which is 0.9, and Asians, it's even lower, 0.5, with Hispanic students about as likely to be identified as the rest of the population. And so these unadjusted ratios answer the important descriptive question of how student experience varies by race. But they do not tell us whether schools are giving Black students the free and appropriate public education that the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is called IDEA, guarantees them. And this is what I've been trying to tell people. I'm warning you, people. I am warning you. You need to ask questions. You need to go to these schools and investigate what is going on and what they're doing to your kids. Please. To answer this question, we must compare the likelihood that a Black student participates in special education with that of an over or otherwise identical white student. In other words, we don't just want to know if Black students are more likely to be in special ed than whites. We want to know if Black students are too likely to be in special ed, or, as it turns out, not likely enough. Okay, so the conventional wisdom that Blacks are over identified for special education may finally be losing ground among academics, but continues to influence public opinion and be reflected in federal law and policy. I recap this academic debate and briefly review some major disparities we observed along racial and ethnic lines in the income and other non-school factors likely to influence the need for special education by the time children enter school. I argue against fixed thresholds for how much variance states should tolerate in districts, special education identification rates across racial and ethnic groups, and for comprehensive social policies to help address disparities in children's well-being. The debate over representation in special education. So in 2002, National Research Council study Donovan and Cross reviewed the literature and the data on differences in special education participation by disability and racial ethnic groups, and cautioned against using unadjusted aggregate group level identification rates to guide public policy. So they crystallize the challenge of interpreting these differences. So if we are asking whether the number identified is in appropriation or proportion to those whose achievement or behavior indicates a need for special supports, then the question is one for which no database currently exists. So differences in aggregation, covariates, and samples generate different answers to the question of whether Black students are over or under identified for special education. And so there's two problems with this, and I'm proposing this. Sometimes there's issues where they're putting too many kids and labeling them special ed that don't need to be even in there. And then there's kids who probably need the help and they're not getting the help. So I'm going on. The most credible studies allow researchers to control for the rich set of students' level characteristics rather than using data aggregate to the district level, firmly establish that Blacks are disproportionately underrepresented. Okay, so in 2010, Hebel, Farkas, and Morgan used the early childhood longitudinal study kindergarten cohort. And it follows up waves to come closer to the ideal scenario described by Donovan and Cross, while individual level models controlling only for race and gender showed Blacks more likely to be identified, adding a family socioeconomic status variable eliminated the effect of race for Blacks, while Hispanics and Asians were significantly less likely to be in special education. And so there it is right there in a nutshell, and I'm pretty much saying it again, okay? While individual level models controlling only for race and gender showed Blacks more likely to be identified, adding a family socioeconomic status variable eliminated the effect of the race for Blacks, while Hispanic and Asians were significantly less likely to be in special education. Adding a student test score made Blacks less likely to be identified. Hispanics and Asian remain less likely to be identified as well. And follow-up study found that the result applied across the 5 disabilities classification study, notably including emotional disturbance, which is called ED in the special ed lingo, and intellectual disabilities, ID, and stigmatizing, characterizing, or categories in which Black boys are overrepresented in the aggregate unadjusted data, okay? So while some have questioned and the generalizability of the ECLS, And it's ECLS with a dash and a K results due to sampling. So the qualitative results has been replicated using a national assessment of educational progress, which is 2017 Morgan ETAL study, an education longitudinal study of 2002. And so a lot of this is probably hard for some people to understand, but basically in a nutshell, I'm going to skip over where it says here. It says Midwestern Urban School District found that while socioeconomic controls attenuate the impact of race, Black students remain more likely than others to be identified for special education, and they did not include student achievement as a covariate. And so I'm going to stop right there because it's pretty lengthy. If you want to know where this article is and the title of it, it's Brookings, and it's by a report that came out by Nora Gordon, Wednesday, September 20th, 2017. You can read it at your leisure. It's pretty lengthy, but it's very clear cut. She's an associate professor, McCourt School of Public Policy in Georgetown University. And so this pretty much shows you a tidbit of the disparities that are going on in this whole scheme of things. There's debate over overrepresentation in special ed. And so most of your kids that fall through the cracks are minority students, and then especially, particularly boys of color. And then there are girls of color in special education as well. And so a lot of them are more likely to be placed in that environment. And those who do need it, a lot of times what happens, it says while states will get to set their own cutoff risk ratios, they're highly unlikely to choose ratios that require a uniform representation across groups. Each state then applies the thresholds to all its districts. That means a district in which Blacks and whites have similar poverty rates will subject to the same thresholds as one in the same state in which Blacks have much lower income than whites. And so a lot of this is all of the racial disparities that have gone on, and how federal policy is on disproportionality as well. So it goes into a lot more detail as to why they do these researches and what they're doing with these kids in these schools. And I think people need to look at this. If you're a parent and you have kids, you need to find out what your kids are learning and what is going on in these schools. You need to find out what schools are being sued and why they're being sued even. You're the parents. You can do the footwork and find out what's going on. And what are they doing to your kids in these schools? Are they representing them? Are they giving them the help that they need? Are they over-representing them and not giving them the help that they need? Are they putting kids in special ed that don't need special ed simply because they're Black? Is there problems in the school that are deeper than just what is going on with your kid, but with staff and the morale? You need to look into all of these things because there are a lot of things going on in these school systems that people wouldn't believe, such as the ethnic cleansing of the nation's teaching staff, some of the laws that have come in effect. And I'm continuing on this. This was a first grade teacher that was under investigation because she was wearing blackface. You have teachers that are biased. They're biased with adults. They're going to be biased with your kids. If you have teachers that are parading around in blackface, making fun of Black people, then guess what they're doing to your children in these classrooms. I'm going to let this video go. I just wanted to give you that information because I know the first video I made about the woman with blackface had some interruptions. This one might, but I'm going to keep saying these messages until they get out there. You're going to get some of it. Maybe it might be choppy, but I am serious about this. This is a really big problem in these school systems. A huge problem. A huge problem. With that being said, I'm going to let this go. Thanks for listening.